it a mistake?
Nice. So, have you ever heard of the healing system Reiki?
Yes, I have.
When I read the book, I had the thought, this is like weaponized Reiki, right? If you could not just affect someone's energy, but actually, like rip it from them. So yes, that's how I've been thinking of it is, death Reiki, uh, or
Yeah,
weaponized empathy.
that's accurate. In fact, in college, I had a professor of religion who was super into Reiki and did a demonstration in class and everything. And I thought, well, that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But I remembered it for years. And so when I was trying to come up with like the magic system, if you will, I really leaned heavily into therapeutic touch and Reiki and all of those energy based practices.
I was gonna ask about that because, like I said, I noticed a lot of these themes, right? In fact, some of the things she was going through almost seemed symbolic of like mental health issues, uh, and I guess that would be my first question: would be, are these are these things symbolic of things that you have gone through or people close to you?
Yes and no. So, kind of something interesting that I find about my book series is I subconsciously write about things about myself and don't realize it until after the fact. So the whole empath thing, I wrote about it and I had picked it seemingly to me at random. But then after I wrote it, I began to like look back on my childhood and my teenagerhood and be like, so that's what was wrong with me. I was just picking up on other people. Like, like I had these really high amounts of anxiety in high school, and I just had such a hard time being in large groups. Like I literally would dread it when my best friend would be like, "We're gonna go to this party." I'm like, "Oh, great," and and that I just don't like people touching me. And I found that I literally can feel like energy leaving me when people are touching me. And so um, I became more attuned to that after I wrote the book, after I did all the research and wrote the book, and began to realize that a lot of it was like myself, but I didn't realize it. So it's kind of like writing the book helped me discover that about myself.
Did it help? Because one of the major themes in your book is Wendy at least trying to learn some level of control, right? Where she doesn't go full rogue and just kill everyone she touches by default. Uh, what was this something where writing this book was a kind of therapy for you?
Oh yeah, like um, one of the big, I guess, aha moments for her in book one is this idea of marriage and like what's the point of marriage. And I really had that sort of question also. I'd been already married for a number of years, but it was sort of like that's what you do in society is you get married, um, without really analyzing deeply the reasons why. And because growing up, I hadn't intended to get married at all, and it wasn't really until I met my husband that I was like, I'm taking you for real. And so, a lot of the questions that are answered in the books are things that I ask myself. So yeah, I guess the answer is for sure. Like for me, that's what's so awesome. That's what I love about writing is that it is a self-discovery for me. If it was simply about a story, I don't know that I would enjoy it very much. One of my more recent books that I wrote in the series was it's a different character's point of view, and I do not relate to her at all. And it was so hard to write. And I remember when I published it, I was just terrified that everybody's going to hate it. And it took me so long just to finish it and be like, and at the end, I was just like, I don't know if I'm ever going to like this. I'm just going to put it out there. And because I need to get this book out this year, because I said I would. And I did. And then people liked it. I was like, I didn't like it at all because I didn't learn anything while I was writing it. I just wrote it because I had, I had actually based it on somebody in my family. And I didn't get it. And I didn't enjoy the process like very much at all. But the books that I enjoy the most are the ones that I relate to, the ones that I help I can dig into and help discover things about myself.
Awesome. Let me ask. I guess we didn't quite get to that point. So we talked about what this book is about, Colorworld. How many books are in that series?
There are 8 right now. There's
8
trying to
books.
be 9. There's like desperately trying to be 9.
9 is
Like,
just clawing its way out of your mind.
like it's not that it's not hard like the previous books. It's just simply lack of time, and like life kind of exploding and things happening in my personal life that have just prevented me from sitting down and having time to actually write. But yes, there are going to be 9 this year. It will be this year, and I'm saying that on camera. It's
Yep,
gonna happen
you're
this
committed
year.
now. You've drawn the
I'm
line.
committed.
All of
Yeah,
these people are going to judge you if you don't get that done.
they should
Uh,
totally judge me, because you know what? I judge George R. R. Martin strongly. So if I
oh,
judge him, then people should definitely judge me.
I think I've never been more offended at an author than when Robert Jordan died. I thought that he had done that to spite me personally when he died and left his Wheel of Time series unfinished.
Hmm.
It I only went back and finished it recently because I didn't want to deal with it, even with Brandon Sanderson doing the end, because I had so much bitterness wrapped up in that. I hope I don't do that to my readers.
There is one book that people tell me about something that happened repeatedly. Like, I feel like it's one of the most mentioned scenes in all of my book series. And they're just like, I couldn't believe that you did. I'm like, I'm sorry, I just had to. And even after all this, I had to. I know that I had to. So,
Would it be spoilers to ask you what that scene was?
um, sure. I mean, there is a really important person to Wendy, the main character, and he dies very tragically, and not just dies tragically, but dies without any, she didn't see it coming, no closure, no goodbyes, no nothing. And so it's very harsh. It's a harsh death. So it's not just that he died, it's like
It's a
he died
ripping.
in a, yeah, it's like you're just kind of like, what? So yeah.
Did he at least die for a reason? Did he die with
Oh,
purpose?
sure.
Oh, good.
Sure. Oh, yes. And the more you read, the more you realize it was almost orchestrated by him himself, and that he knew, and that he was really in the works all along. So,
That comforts me a little bit. I gotta say I don't like the authors who kill just for shock value.
mhm.
That's probably one of the main problems I have with George R. R. Martin is just the killing for the sake of killing. Like, no, like, have them die for something. So okay, I'm okay with that much death. Death is the part of life. It's a whole cyclical thing.
Correct.
So now back in college, you thought that whole Reiki thing was all mumbo jumbo. Are you more into energy stuff right now?
So I have not personally participated in energy therapy, professional energy therapy, but I will say this, that certain people I've begun to recognize are energy givers and some are energy takers. So my youngest daughter, for example, she could just be like, she's like, "Oh, mom, can I do your makeup?" Right? And I'm like, "Sure, yeah, you can do my makeup." Like, she won't have even touched me yet, and I can like literally feel like her energy. It's almost like relaxing. I don't know if you've ever had like a professional massage or like acupuncture. It's super relaxing. You almost want to fall asleep. She has that effect where like I just am instantly relaxed if I know she's going to be in my vicinity. And then I've had that experience with a few other people that are just like, they give energy, and so when their energy enters yours, you're like almost pulling from them. And then, the other interesting thing about my daughter is that when she went into kindergarten, she would come home and sleep for like 4 hours after kindergarten, because she was just, everybody had been pulling at her all day and she hadn't learned to like build up a tolerance. So I noticed, things like that. So yeah, I'm very much a believer in at least the idea of spiritual energy, and that negative emotions are pull at you, and then like positive emotions are giving emotions of giving energy. I don't know, I don't actually participate in anything regularly on a regular basis. Just, I don't know, like I believe in it, but I don't stake my like health on it or anything like that. Like there's so many other, there's a validity to just about everything, if you look for it. So yeah, I guess if that answers your question. I'm not really like a quack science like nut. I have essential oils in my house, but I don't like do them religiously or anything. I just, if I need a little extra, if it crosses my mind. So yeah, I don't know. Does
Nice.
that answer your question?
Oh yeah, no, and I get it entirely. I myself am an amateur acupuncturist, uh,
Oh,
which is just as horrifying as it sounds. Just picture acupuncture, but without any training, right? Uh, but
who's your guinea pig?
well, it started out with me.
Oh, you put it on yourself?
Yes, men should not be left alone. This is a thing, especially not men like me who are very curious. And so, yes, I found some acupuncture needles, and I
Uh-huh.
read a book about it, and I started just trying it out. Uh,
How's it
so
work?
it is actually remarkably effective for what it's good at.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if we've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but uh, yeah, I found that acupuncture is remarkably good for muscle tension and
Mm-hmm.
for pain. In fact, you might not know this about me, but I have a really bad back. Like most of the time I'm in pain, just because of my back. And it's to the point where, yeah, there's almost no level of chiropractic or massage that'll actually touch that core, but acupuncture will. So my wife stabs me.
Oh.
Uh, we don't
So is
even.
that what initially drove you to try it in the first place then?
Nope. It
Yeah.
was a purely hobby curiosity. Uh, just grab needles and stab them in my leg to see what would happen.
Okay.
For those
Okay.
listening at home, I do not recommend that.
Okay. Self-mutilation, acupuncture, whatever.
Uh, anyways, but yes, it's also the only thing that'll touch my dad's shoulder pain. And so, yeah, things like that, pain type
Yeah.
things, I've found acupuncture is really, really good at. I've heard stories about like it curing allergies and things like that. I have not seen that personally.
Yeah.
So I'm still a little bit skeptical, but as far as like the pain stuff, I have seen too much to doubt. Uh,
Yeah.
anyways, so yeah, that was one of the things that came up as I was reading about Wendy and her weaponized empathy. And yeah, it makes perfect sense. Now I'm hearing about you and your daughter, being in crowds and feeling drained by it. Makes me thankful that I myself was never invited to any parties. So, I didn't have to go through that. Uh,
Pretty much, yeah. I
now,
wish that I hadn't been. No. No, it was the learning experience. So yeah.
oh, I had the benefit as a teenager of being just a little bit scary, not enough to really concern people, but just enough to dissuade any invitation. So
Yeah.
that worked out pretty well. Uh,
I don't, I don't. I'm glad. I'm glad you've had,
now,
good experience.
I normally wouldn't bring this up, but you mentioned earlier your husband.
Hmm.
And I bring him up because he has declared me his rival. Uh, and how did you two meet?
We met at Walmart, actually. I trained him. He was a temp, and I trained him how to count down his till. It was close to Christmas time, so brought on a bunch of temps, and I was his trainer.
He was a Walmart Christmas temp,
Yep.
and you trained him, and that was the beginning of this love story.
Yeah, yeah. I think our love story is actually cooler than Wendy and Gabe's, but you know, I don't know. I guess you could be the judge of that. Ours is almost as unbelievable, I think. People are always like, "Oh, it's so cheesy and the love story is so unbelievable." I'm like, dude, the love story is the most believable part about the book. Just because that's my personal experience, it's very swift and um he's always been ultra cheesy. So like, he's even more cheesy than Gabe. Like I had to reel in the cheese on Gabe because I knew it was just not going to go over well. with readers. So I had to reel it in. But in real life, my husband is actually that cheesy. So
So I'm assuming, because like I said, as authors, we often base characters off of real people. Is Gabriel Brad?
um so he loves to say yes, but there are many things about Gabe that are not at all like Brad and much more like me. So Gabe is very analytical, and he does a lot. He loves to research. He loves to know about everything. Brad does, but to only to an extent that it serves him. Whereas Gabe's curious about everything. I'm kind of the same way. Um, is Gabe, but Gabe's like hangups, like so Gabe's flaws and imperfections, those are very much like my husband. Um, just like maybe getting over like the idea of like you want your spouse to be happy and you think you know how they're going to be happy, and so you try to make that happiness instead of like letting them figure that out for themselves. Like that's very much the beginning of our marriage, and that was something that rolled with that he had to figure out how to do that. So yeah, yes, to an extent. Often when I ask myself like what would Gabe do in this situation, and I really have no idea, I ask Brad honestly, because Gabe is such an out of the box thinker and I'm not really, and Brad absolutely is. So I'll ask him, what would you do in this situation? And I always get a really like ridiculous answer, but I mean it's out of the box.
It's real.
That's literally the definition. Yeah.
Yeah. That is who he is. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Now, paint me a picture here. So you get married. At what point did you write your book?
Um, so 2009 is when I started writing. We got married in 2002. So 7 years after we got married.
Okay. Then what? You have this book, right? It exists now.
Yeah.
How do you go about promoting it? I imagine a lot of
Um,
authors out there have the same question, like, what was your journey with promotion?
so I wish it was a short story. I'll try to like sum it up a little bit. But after I wrote the first three books, I was like, I should really learn about writing. Now that I've written these three books, I hadn't published them yet. They were still manuscripts. And I went to get my creative writing degree, and I took so my one of my classes was about hey, thanks, sorry. One of my classes was about uh, research, like basically writing research papers. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I'm good at research papers. And the topic that I picked was um, how electronic media was affecting the publishing industry. So it was really kind of the advent of ebooks. They really had started to become like a thing. And so the landscape was changing pretty drastically. And as I did my research, I began to realize what literary agents and publishers were looking for. And I kind of liken it to football players. So if someone's getting drafted, like someone gets drafted based on believing that already that they're successful, like they're already like if you look at Zion Williamson in Duke basketball, like he was already a thing when he got recruited. It was like a no-brainer. And so they're kind of looking for a no-brainer, someone who already has a following, somebody who already is a thing, or they're an expert in their field or whatever. Very rarely are they looking for raw talent, raw undiscovered talent. That's kind of very much like a lottery sort of thing. Like the chances of that are very, very small. And even if you pick up a publisher, you're almost 100% responsible for your own marketing, even in that case. You don't really get thrown this giant budget to market your book.
Well, certainly
And
not as a first-time author.
yeah, certainly not. And so I just really was like disillusioned with the whole process. And so I just decided not even go that route. And really didn't put much into the books until my husband was like, you should really like publish this just to have it published, to say, you never know. So I did with books one, then book two, and then he didn't really read it, I think, until the second book had come out. And he was like, oh, this is really good. And then he read the second one. He was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I'm going to help you make this a big thing. So as you probably know, most authors are not very good marketers. We are not, it just doesn't, marketing and creativity just don't really, it just, yeah.
There are times where they are almost conflicting
Yeah,
skills. The way
yeah,
I say is, authors are not out promoting at the party. They're at home writing, right?
yeah,
We're not the extroverts. And so, yeah, it's a
yeah,
lot easier for us to be at home writing.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, because you have to have this level of honesty with yourself. And you almost have to put on a different personality in order to market. It's not that you have to lie about your book, but you almost kind of do. Like you almost have to, you have to put on, you have to make it, you have to market, you have to convince people. And you're not just selling your book most of the time. Most of the time you're selling yourself. And like that's just that's against the grain if you're an artistic type. What you're doing with your art is you're putting yourself out there in your art, because this part of you isn't easily portrayed to other people. So when he decided to jump on board and help me market the book, I thought, well, there's really no better person out there to actually market, because there's nobody more promotional, more driven, doesn't give up than my husband. So he started off doing some marketing, but eventually was like, we got to take this to the people who want to read about superheroes. We got to go to Comic Cons. So we went to Salt Lake Comic Con, was our first one, and I think we brought like I think we brought like we bought like 1,000 copies, I want to say. It was something astronomical.
I remember it being quite ambitious.
Yes, my husband was like, well, there's this many people there, and if we can sell to this percentage, this is how many books we need to sell. And I'm like, whatever. I write books. And I think we like totally bombed. We must have sold like 50 copies or something. I don't even remember. But we went home dejected with our tail between our legs, but not to be daunted. My husband was like, okay, we just have to reinvent the wheel. So we decided to embark on an RV tour, and we bought like a really old RV because that's what we could afford. We raised like $20,000 through Kickstarter to buy that RV. We sold all of the furniture in our house to be able to pay for a bunch of comic book conventions at that time, and put all 4 of our kids, ages 3 and up, 3 to like 12, and put them in an RV and traveled America.
So
selling my book.
let me sum up here. You had a convention experience.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, by your own standards, failed.
Mm-hmm.
And from that experience, you said, what we really need is to double down on this with fury and fervor.
Well, you have to understand, we had just dropped like thousands of dollars on books, okay? Like, okay, not to get too lost in the weeds, but before I made that purchase of all of, I mean, it was huge. I'm trying to think, it was like $5,000 or something. I had, before I pressed like buy on that, I had this experience where I was just like my heart was beating, and I was like, I don't know, we should do this as like the rest of our savings, right? Our cash savings, all right, the rest of what we have. And I just had this experience where I had looked up to the sky because my son was in flag football, and so I was at practice, and I had looked up, and immediately the verse came to mind that the one about God taking care of the sparrow, does he not also take care of the sparrows? And that's kind of how inspiration and assurance, spiritual reassurance, has always come to me. Like things that I've read will come to mind at the exact time that I'm thinking, just out of the blue, like song lyrics and things like that. So I just knew that it was going to be okay. I was like, I can do this. And so pressed by. And even though like we had failed at that, it was kind of like, okay, yes, we failed. And obviously this is going to be a lot harder than we imagined. But we kind of are already in it. And how can we do it better? So up until that point, we had thought going to conventions from our home base, right? Every month or so. Well, if we're going to actually make money at this, we have to do them more often. And we also knew that our house that we had in North Dakota could be rented for quite a bit of money. And so any extra that we didn't have to live off of from actually selling books, we could earn from our house as a rental. And so we kind of had some things that made it make sense at the time, and we could actually financially do it without being like, oh, we gotta have a backup plan. Right. We did have a plan going into it, and then it wasn't a small thing to do that. I mean, I say, oh, we just decided to do this thing, but in reality, like we fasted. We're religious people, so we fasted and we prayed. And should we go out on the road in an RV or in a camper, which we hadn't decided which one we were going to do at that point. And like literally the next day after we had really put in some fasting and prayer time, there was a van and a camper parked in front of our house. And there was one of those magnetic signs on the van that said Jesus. I have a picture of it, by the way. And just to be clear, like our kids knew that this was something that we were thinking about doing. And as soon as they walked home from school and they saw it, they said, oh my gosh, we're going on the road. Like they already knew. The answer was so obvious that they were like, okay, clearly. And I remember when I said to my parents, like, you're going to have to make this super clear, because I'm not just going to like go do this, because I'm not really a spontaneous person. So you're going to have to like make it really clear. And that's what happened. So
no gentle nudges. I need the 2x4.
Yeah. Like some things you really need a pretty clear sign. Other things, it's like, I can kind of head that direction and be okay. But this was like, we were going to do it. It's going to require like major changes and major action taken to be able to make it work.
Oh, certainly. Now, there was your moment. Now you're on the road. I imagine you could probably write books just about that experience. But tell me just what were some of the high points and low points? What was like the coolest thing that happened on the road, and what was the biggest gut punch, if you don't mind me asking?
Let's see. So the hardest thing was that we were together 24/7. And we were all 6 of us in a 50-foot RV. And my husband and I had, at least until that point, had some sort of separation of duties. Like I had always helped him in his business, but really sort of as a like, I'll help you out with this thing. I'll send some emails. I'll talk to this customer. But it was never like a true collab, you know? And so we really had some pretty nasty fights in the RV about things, mostly because I was always trying to pull back and take less risk, and he was always trying to push and take more risk. And so there was a lot of like finding that balance and me trusting him. I am well aware that he has huge amounts of capability. But at the same time, he also doesn't really know where the limits should be. And so he's willing to take things just all the way past reasonable. And I'm kind of like that voice of reason that says like, let's maybe not. But I had to learn to recognize where he was kind of talking crazy and where maybe the limits should be that they weren't already. So for me, that was the hardest thing, is like, relationship wise, is like I really figured him out and learned to trust him. in that in that situation. And then also, you know, my kids were in there and they're little and they're bored and they just want to, you know, they want to like play video games all day, which would be super easy, just give them a device. But I was also trying to be a good mom, you know, and homeschool, like teach them something. And then you combine that with um, the anxiety of I could break down any minute, or oh my gosh, we're driving down this little tiny street and it looks like we're about to hit the cars. And like sometimes we would be driving through a city and I couldn't even like sit in the front seat because I was always afraid that we were going to hit something. So I like could sit in the back. So I don't know that there were specific incidents that were particularly horrific more than others. It was just the constant anxiety, like there was never a break. I mean, I just remember being like, and I don't drink, but there were many times I was like, I really could just use a drink right now just to like chill out, you know. And we were pretty destitute, you know. I didn't have health insurance. We lived off of like cheese quesadillas and yogurt and granola and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I mean, like my whole cabinets were full of peanut butter. Like that's what we ate. And granola bars, which by the way, I used to love granola bars, and now it's like if I have to, like, okay, I don't have time, I guess I have to eat this protein bar or whatever. Cannot stand them now. Like there's not a single one that I like to consume as a result of that's all we ate almost for the entire time. So it was just that constant like nagging of like what could go wrong next. That was so hard and so stressful. And really my hair went gray during that time. I like literally so high points. Really sort of just witnessing the miraculous saves over and over and over and over and over again. People just I was always shocked to find how many people were watching who maybe never commented, who maybe never reposted any of our videos, never liked them. But then like out of the blue, I'd get this message from this person who's like, oh, I saw that you guys are going through blah, blah, blah. And I went about, here's, you know, whatever. Just like being really surprised at how many people were rooting for us. But then also I think a lot of people were like waiting for us to fail. Like, oh, I told you so. Oh, I told you you shouldn't go after your dreams. Oh, I told you it was going to be like this. So, you know, there was always that like wondering how many people were judging us that way and trying not to care about it. And then also how many people were watching and wanting to support us. So I gained like really thick skin through that period of like, you know, you just had to like not worry about what people thought. And you just had to do what you believed was right and what you were supposed to do and what you were called to do. And I became relatively bulletproof because of that ongoing journey.
I'm still working on that myself. I wouldn't say I'm thin-skinned, but I wouldn't describe myself as bulletproof. Now, we're going to take a small detour here because we do actually have a question in the chat here. A little bit more nuts and bolts. We have an aspiring writer here who had a question. They're wondering about the best way to grab readers' attention at the beginning of a book.
In medias res. In the middle of the action. I don't know. I mean, you could actually, I remember reading an article about so when I originally had started the series, or it started the first book in the series, I think I had something like her waking up to an alarm. And then I read this article not long after that was like, do not ever have your book start with someone waking up to an alarm.
Called you out.
Overdone. I was like, ooh.
Oh, bad.
So I ended up like sort of condensing things so that like she gets this letter from her uncle. And so we're immediately wondering like, what is this about? And she's obviously putting a lot of stock in this thing. We got to know what he wants. So really like to start off with a question immediately. So one of my favorite authors who really inspires me is Madeleine L'Engle. She's like a
Mm.
middle grade author. She writes fantasy, but really sort of realistic fantasy. It's all like marrying of like fantasy and real world and science, which I just adore. Um, one of her books starts with like, and there were dragons in the garden. Like some dragons were doing blah 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 in the garden, and that's how she starts like the book. And you're like, wait, what? What? She writes it so nonchalantly. So always to start with something that's, it should be within the first couple pages. There should be something intriguing, because one of the things that you have to remember about books is that every voice is different, and it takes a while for a reader to acclimate themselves to an author's voice. So it's actually very hard to understand them at first. So you have to really catch them before they kind of are like, I don't know what this person is talking about, with something that's going to intrigue them, because it's just very hard when you first start reading a book to really like kind of get the language, I guess, because everybody has their own voice. And so you want to make sure that there's something that you're grabbing them with.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, that mystery right off the bat, I've always said, is so important. Returning to kind of your timeline here. So book number 9 is coming out this year. You
Yes.
promised everyone.
Yep. Unless I die, which I have no control over. But if I'm alive, that book is coming out.
Don't die. Don't pull a Robert Jordan.
Oh,
Do that. And then is the series complete?
no. So book 9 is actually part of technically book 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is actually made up of 6 volumes. So they're shorter stories. So each book is, I don't know, around 100,000 words, which is short for me, by the way. And so book 6 is comprised of several volumes. Are you familiar with Crash, the movie Crash?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but go ahead and
Okay,
give me the
well,
premise.
there's like Sandra Bullock's in it, and like Ludacris, and like a few other big names. And essentially, what it is you watch all these like different storylines happening through the movie, and then at the end, you realize how they all relate to each other, like how somehow they end up creating this overall story. That's why it's called Crash. You have these several seemingly unrelated timelines that crash into each other. So that's kind of where book 6, multiple volumes, came from, is that I started writing from different points of view, because the world, Wendy's world, became so large. And when you're writing first person, it's very easy to get stuck in their head and not really have a concept of what's happening outside of the main character. And so I combated that by having other points of view, and then showing how those points of view end up relating to Wendy's story in unexpected ways. So I've actually really enjoyed writing those volumes. And then once the 6 volumes are done, there will be one final book, book 7, at the end.
Is that what brings these 6 Crash books,
Well,
if you will, back together?
Well, no, they'll come together in volume 6 of book 6. If that makes sense. So the final volume will bring them all together. But really, they can't. You do see how they relate to Wendy's story toward the end of each volume. So you kind of know how they relate to each other, and then you're going to kind of see Wendy's side of it at book 6. How each one played into her timeline.
Gotcha. So we got the 6 more books of book 6, and then book 7, which will be book.
Yeah. So we're on volume. I have published volume 3. Okay. So then the one that I'm putting out this year is volume 4, which will be the 9th book that I've written. Period. If that makes sense.
All right. Now, once you have finished this series, is that like your work completed, or are you going to start on other series?
Um, you know, I have observed my daughter and those like her, and they always say that your the people who make you a good like make you a popular author, the people who are most supportive are called super fans. Super fans are vitally important to being able to create a franchise, if you will. And those super fans are never tired of your universe, and they will, like my daughter, she's super into Avatar, like loves Avatar. She not only loves Avatar, she goes on Wattpad and reads every single piece of fan fiction, no matter how terrible it is, because
Wow.
she just cannot get enough of that universe. And it's not even that it has to be the same. It doesn't have to like align with the rest of the story. It just has to have the same characters who are somewhat similar. Like in Avatar, are waterbender, earthbender, fire, all that. You could have the same characters, but have them not do bending. As long as the same characters are there, they're happy. Like they want to read more of those characters. They are invested. And so I can't say for sure because like, best laid plans and all that, but I definitely want to stay in the universe, whether it's previous generation to Wendy or following generation to Wendy or side characters that people have loved.
So just
I
keep
enjoy
building
writing.
on this
Yeah,
universe.
I really enjoy writing Wendy and I enjoy her universe. And so, like, why wouldn't I continue to do something? Just because the series is over doesn't mean the story has to be over, that I can't give people more of what they want. I'm really more about my own self-discovery than I am about which story it is and whether it's different or not. So chances are I'll probably end up staying in that universe in some way, shape, or form.
Random question about your super fans.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a name for super fans of your work?
No, no. That would maybe one day. I don't know. I'll have to ask some of them next time I encounter. Like, do you have a Colorworld fan, like super fan name? Let's come up with
Okay,
a name
cool.
for
We'll put that out to the internet.
that. Yeah,
Everybody watching, come up with a name for
super fan
super
name.
fans of the Color World
Mm-hmm.
world. No, I remember it was at a Comic Con. Somebody came up and told me that they were a Conradiac, and I was like, "Sweet!" So, I was wondering if there were other names out there. So that's really cool. All right, we put that out on the internet. We'll see what they come up with.
Yeah.
Because I imagine you have a fair amount of super fans by now, right? You have traveled the
Oh,
country,
droves of super
droves
fans.
of super fans. Excellent,
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
Uh, See, they deserve a name. Uh, Excellent, excellent. Yeah, what is next? You said you don't have to travel as much now. What did you mean by that? How are things going?
So we have decided to trust in the internet. Neither Brad nor myself are big fans of the internet because we just don't understand how it works. I mean, I know how it works practically, but I don't know how it works in like things becoming viral or popular. And we have a pretty significant fan base, not just of the book series, but of Color World, the brand in general, because we do lots of other things with Color World besides books. And so we have a fair number of followers who, like I said in the beginning, selling books is more about selling yourself than it is about selling the book. The pitch is great and everything, but your personality while you give the pitch, the confidence with which you give the pitch, um, what kind of conversation precedes the pitch or follows the pitch. Those are what sells books. And so for us, we've established that fan base of people who like us. We actually we have a marketing firm at this point who in the last month completely rebuilt our Colorworld Books website, because it's always sucked. Like, it's kind of one of those things that's like, just, we haven't spent a lot of time on it because we just haven't believed in the internet. And so our marketing guy, who's worked for us for a year now, is like, your website sucks. I'm gonna fix it. So he's been fixing our site, so that when we drive traffic there, people will actually be like, oh, this is actually a nice looking book series, not just a trashy looking book series. So that's kind of our angle at this point. We are doing a handful of conventions this year, a handful, like once a month maybe. But we, as far as the books are concerned, we're really focusing on online sales now. Whereas before we were focusing on in-person sales and like spreading the word that way. But we have kind of other endeavors to try to drive traffic to the books besides that, but that's where our focus is.
All right. And what is that website?
Colorworldbooks.com.
All right, everybody, check it out.
The United States spelling, not the Canadian or the UK spelling.
Colorworld.
Yeah, Colorworld.
All right. You should get a Canadian version that you just add the U into color.
Yeah. I probably could get that website, to be honest, like Colorworld with the, yeah. I've been wanting to buy colorworld.com, but there's this painting company somewhere, this little rinky-dink painting company that owns the domain. I'm like, so.
Yep, mine is lanceconradbooks.com because, yeah, Lance Conrad was already taken.
Yep.
Turns out there's a few other Lance Conrads out there.
Yeah.
We compete. There's a multi-level marketer, and there's a musician, Lance Conrad, and a used car salesman, Lance Conrad. And we all kind of compete for internet attention for the name. Have you run into any of those? Are there any other Rachel Kellys that you get mistaken for?
For a time, Rachel, so there aren't really any Rachel E. Kellys. So that's kind of where we market as Rachel E. Kelly. But there were quite a few like things that will come up before Rachel Kelly, who I don't know what they do. I haven't really paid attention to who they are. And then Colorworld, it seems like every time I type Colorworld into like Amazon, for example, I get like albums, like music albums and stuff like that come up first. So my goal is to, if I'm searching for a book, it should really give me a book. And mine's the only one named Colorworld that I've seen. So, yeah.
I've had this idea in the back of my head. I just need to team up with the musician Lance Conrad, and I write the song and he does the music. So we have music by Lance Conrad and words by Lance Conrad, but they're actually different Lance Conrads. I think that'd be cool. Be like a bucket list item.
Yeah. Well, plus, I really am intrigued, and this is something I'd love to do in the future. I feel like somebody's going to do this before I have the funds to do it, but I love, because I have so many songs in my head that I was really into during particular scenes or particular books that I was writing. I would love to like have some way for a reader to read the books while also listening to the playlist, and it happen at the right times and each it right. Because I just think music just adds, that's what's so great about movies, is like the music, the score, right? And you don't really have that in books right now, but I would love to see that. So like if there was like the Lance Conrad playlist, or Rachel Kelly playlist to go, you purchase both and then you get like the music experience too.
Say, could you just do that as a bonus track on an audiobook? Like
upgrade my book to have
the background music. That'd be amazing. By the way, the internet has already suggested Wendonians for your superfan name.
Okay.
So we're just spinning ideas here.
Okay.
So we already have your first suggestion for your superfan name. See if Wendonians catches on.
Well, some people are like less fans of Wendy, and in fact, I haven't really met anybody that's like, oh my gosh, Wendy's the best character ever. Everybody seems to like all the other characters, like, oh, I like Mike, or oh, I like Abe, or oh, I like Kaylin. oh, can you write books about Caitlin? Like,
Is there a
and I
front
don't,
runner? Is there one character who stands out above all? Is that
you know,
people's favorite?
not really, but I would say that I get more requests for Kaylin stories than any other character. Like, if I were to write another story outside of the series, it would probably be Kaylin, just because people just seem to love her. And to be honest, I didn't really like her all that much until the audiobooks. And Brittany Karbowski, who performs her, just did such a like fantastic job that I now really like Kaylin. I'm like, because of the extra oomph that Brittany adds to her as a character. So that was just a really interesting experience to like really not like a character, but then be like, oh man, she's such a badass. Like, you know, so yeah.
Brittany Karbowski, hasn't she done some other stuff with voice acting?
Yeah, so all of the individuals who do the Colorworld audiobooks are anime voice actors. So Jeremy Lee is Wendy. She does all the narration and Wendy. And then Todd Habercorn does Gabe and Ezra, Wendy's brother. And then Brittany Karbowski does Kaylin. David Wall does Mike. And more actors get added to that roster. So that's kind of a cool thing that we sort of married the anime world with Wendy's world. And so a lot of the people who are really into the audiobooks happen to be just really big fans of those voice actors' work in general. And
So name drop here. What are some of the animes that they've worked on?
so Jeremy and Todd are both in Fairy Tale, which is one of the biggest animes. And also, I mean, Jeremy's also in Soul Eater, and gosh, she has like a huge roster of like different animes. Fairy Tale's my favorite. That's why that one came out first. And then she's in My Hero Academia and Black Butler and Sword Art Online. She's definitely one of the most prolific voice actresses out there. And then Todd is sort of her counterpart, male side. He's actually also in Fairy Tale. We picked most of the actors that we picked were in Fairy Tale because that was our favorite. And but he does a number of so he works with Netflix and does a number of voiceovers for foreign films. So you know how you watch, there's lots of films now on Netflix that are just from other countries that have just been dubbed over. So he does a lot of the work on those dubs. Sometimes I'll be watching a show, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Todd. So it's funny how that works. But
I'm afraid I'm a diehard subtitles guy, so
no,
I'm sorry.
I don't have the time. You have to like actually sit down and read and watch at the same time. And
I love it.
Like,
I'm all for it. I keep subtitles on my English movies. I just love having those subtitles there. It comforts me.
But doesn't it, I don't know, like I feel like when there are subtitles, it's like I'm compelled. I feel like they're forcing me because I can't look away. And even if I don't want to read the subtitles and I can clearly understand the language that's being said, I'm still reading them because it's like I'm drawn. It's like forcing me to stare. No subtitles.
Well, to each their own. Now, we are pretty much out of time already. Any final things you'd like to say to people watching, your fans, young authors who would want to follow in your footsteps? What would you like to say to the world?
So I did this really great online interview. If I were more prepared as a marketer for myself, I would know the name of the website immediately, but I don't. But I did an interview recently that was like an online article interview, and they asked that same question as like, what would be the one advice that you give? And I'm like, I make a good story for not going with traditional publishing, but I only did that with confidence that I had an alternative plan, meaning I had someone who was already, my husband is already geared toward that. He already, that's his shtick. But if you're just a solo writer and you don't have a plan for how you're going to market, if you know that if you're not that extroverted, salesy personality, it's very hard to actually self-publish. It's not something that I recommend to people. When they ask me at conventions, like, oh, do you think I should self-publish? I'm like, no, no, I do not. I certainly don't regret it, but again, I have a Brad, and not everybody has a Brad. So,
Brad is
uh,
a singular entity.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So, you have to like be realistic with yourself, and recognize what your weakness is, and prepare adequately, and don't believe in winning the lottery, because chances are it's just not going to happen. And really just consistently producing work. I think it's Brandon Sanderson who had something like 13 books out before anybody ever even cared who he was. So producing consistently, it's really the same thing as YouTube or Twitch. Like, producing content consistently is the best way to gain attention, um, and having a plan of action to like get that out to people.
Excellent.
So, my very practical, boring advice:
So
don't necessarily go get an RV like me. Go,
make a
have fun.
plan, be determined, but be realistic.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like it.
Realistic expectations. Like expectations, because so many people are like expecting you to send out a query letter and then have an answer back, and like, oh, now you have a publisher. No.
Well, most of all, I think what I love about your story was when you double down after disappointment. Because the way I've seen things, the authors that I've talked to, this will kind of be my closing message, is 80, if not 90% of writers who fail don't fail because their ideas weren't creative enough or their writing wasn't good enough. They give up. It's just so discouraging. And so, yeah, in many ways, I know it's hard because you lived it, but you are a very inspiring figure just for the kind of determination that you and Brad, yes, but you were certainly there through all of it, brought to the game. So yeah, an incredible amount of determination, and that's what I think a lot of people who go down this road, no matter what path they choose, right, whether it's self-publishing or traditional publishing or hybrid or whatever, doesn't matter which path you go down. You need that determination.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, you come at it in a certain. I think Brad's greatest strength is you come at it. If that fails, you tweak it. You come at it. That fails, you tweak it again. You just keep tweaking it until you find something that works. Look, to be quite honest, I've got 8, almost 9 books out, but I'm still not where I want to be sales wise. But I don't have any intention of like quitting. I love writing. People buy my books. People like my books, and I'll just keep producing and coming at it in different directions, and then eventually, we'll get there. And then I don't spend too much time thinking about. I don't read reviews. I literally do not read reviews, because I understand the purpose of reviews is not for authors, it's for readers.
I do, and
It's
it's
that.
awful. It's absolutely awful.
Stop that. Stop that
I
right
can't stop. I always have to
now.
look, and it's
Oh
even
no.
the good ones. I'm like, that's not what I meant, though, right? So yeah, it's
I don't read any of them, even the good ones. Yeah.
that's it's probably better. All right.
Yes, it is. Trust me. It's so freeing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Uh,
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was fun.
oh, it was a good time. And thank you, everybody, for coming out and watching. Again, this was Rachel Kelly. The book was Colorworld. And next week, join us. We are going to have Mike back on here. We're back to Story Stream. And our subject is going to be, does this look infected? It is going to be a collection of stories from the history of medicine. We might be doing a few different medicine story streams because holy smokes, there was a lot of material there. So make sure you join us next week, Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And as always, remember, like, comment, subscribe, support us on Patreon, all that good stuff. Thank you all so much. And thanks again, Rachel, for joining us. All right.